Okay, today we're doing a deep dive into a pretty detailed policy analysis. It's arguing for a really fundamental change in U.S. foreign aid policy regarding Israel, specifically around the operations in Gaza.
Right, and it's not just, a moral point. It frames this as a legal and strategic issue, too. The source basically says the current way the U.S. offers support, that sort of unconditional backing, carries some serious risks.
Legal, strategic, and moral risks. And it puts the U.S. in this position of having to choose, right? Being an enabler or stepping up as an enforcer of international law.
Exactly. That's the core tension the report highlights.
So our mission today is really to unpack what the analysis sees as the costs of being an enabler and what kind of policy shift it's proposing instead. And the report kicks off with legal accountability. It argues that the unconditional U.S. support is, facilitating military operations that show systemic issues with international humanitarian law.
Yeah, things like distinction and proportionality in attacks.
And the details it provides are quite stark, aren't they?
They are. The analysis points to verified fatality reports, suggesting that nearly 70% of those verified killed are women and children.
70%? Wow.
And the report uses this kind of data to argue there's an apparent indifference to civilian casualties, which could breach IHL standards.
And then there are the wider legal implications. The analysis flags the International Court of Justice finding, the one about the plausibility of genocide.
Right, the ICJ ruling. It says that finding creates a serious risk threshold.
So the argument is, if the U.S. keeps sending arms after that ruling, it's essentially increasing its own legal liability, maybe even becoming complicit.
That's precisely the risk the analysis outlines.
Yeah.
And it suggests this is made worse by failures back home.
You mean domestic law?
Yeah, the Leahy Law. It's supposed to stop aid going to foreign security units if there are credible claims of gross human rights violations.
Okay.
But the report states, and this is a direct quote, the U.S. has never found a single Israeli security force unit ineligible for assistance.
Never. That seems significant.
The analysis calls it a systematic bureaucratic exemption. Basically, it's saying this system is set up to not find ineligibility.
That's a strong claim, a systematic bureaucratic exemption. So if the law isn't being enforced, what's the cost? Strategically, financially?
Well, strategically, the report argues this unconditional alignment has become functionally self-destructive.
Yeah.
It generates instability that then needs costly U.S. military intervention to manage.
Right. Okay. Does it give figures on that cost?
It does. The total estimated U.S. spending, just on the conflict and related regional stuff since October 7th, 2023, it's pegged at $22.76 billion and counting.
22 billion. And wait, you mentioned related regional operations.
Yes, and this is a key point for you listening. Almost $5 billion of that $4.86 billion is just the operational cost for the U.S. military responding to spillover.
Like the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea.
Exactly. So the argument is the unconditional aid isn't saving money. It actually creates situations where the U.S. has to spend billions more to contain the fallout.
So it's a cycle. What about the diplomatic cost?
That's another major point. The report mentions the frequent use of the U.S. veto at the UN Security Council. 49 times since 1948 on resolutions critical of Israel.
49 vetoes.
And the analysis argues this severely damages U.S. credibility, as a neutral mediator. And it fuels anti-American sentiment, which helps rivals like China and Russia.
Okay, so the legal risks, the financial burden, the diplomatic damage. This leads us to the report's actual policy prescription, doesn't it?
It does. It calls for moving away from this blank check approach.
Towards what?
Towards a framework of conditional engagement, putting clear conditions on aid.
What kind of conditions?
Things like an immediate verifiable halt to settlement expansion in the West Bank, and crucially, the full enforcement of the Leahy Law. No more exceptions.
Full enforcement. And the report also touches on the politics of this, specifically around criticism, right?
Yes, it makes a point of saying we need to decouple legitimate criticism from prejudice. It mentions frameworks like the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism
to make the point that
advocating for Palestinian justice or critiquing specific Israeli government policies isn't automatically anti-Semitic. It argues that protecting that space for critique is vital for good policymaking.
Right, separating policy critique from bigotry.
So, wrapping up the core argument, the analysis concludes that unconditional military support actually undermines long-term U.S. strategic goals.
Like normalization with Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Because, the report argues, it gives away the leverage the U.S. needs to push the parties towards, a real political solution.
Which leaves us with the final thought, really. The report itself mentions the temporary pause on shipping large bombs earlier this year. It was meant to deliver a message. It showed conditional aid can be used.
Practical example, yeah.
So the question for you to consider is, if the tool exists, and if the report is right about the costs, billions of dollars, legal risks, strategic setbacks, why does the U.S. seem to maintain what the analysis calls an institutionalized failure to enforce its own existing laws?